before his representative comes up. The president, George Opongwe of Liberia, is a Liberian politician and former professional footballer who is currently serving as the 25th president of Liberia in office since 2018. He had a 10-year professional playing career which ended in 2003 when he entered politics. He formed the Congress for Democratic Change and ran unsuccessfully for president in the 2005 elections. In the 2011 elections, he ran again unsuccessfully. But in 2017, he was elected president of Liberia, defeating the incumbent vice president, and was sworn in January 22nd, 2018. And something that our former head of state, General Yakubu Gowon, had said, he told him, if you fail once, if you fail twice, keep trying again. And he tried, and the third time became his lucky charm. So representing him today, we have the Honorable Minister of Information, Cultural Affairs, and Tourism. Please, ladies and gentlemen, let's give him a Nigerian welcome. Please, a round of applause for Honorable Eugene Nagbe.
Thanks a lot. His Excellency General Yakubu Gowon, former head of state of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Professor Patrick Otome, founder, and Mrs. Otome, chair of the Center for Values in Leadership, Bishop Matthew Hassan, Bishop of the Catholic Archdiocese of Sokoto, panelists, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm greatly honored to be standing here today representing a man who has become a beacon of hope for millions of people in my country. Our celebrate illustrious President George Manneh Weah. Just over a year ago, Liberians went to the polls and changed the state of affairs of our country. They elected as their president a man who had experienced the different extremes of life, from growing up in the slums of Monrovia, beset by poverty and inequality, to a life of stardom and luxury as a football star in Europe, yet remaining a humble humanitarian and a patriot through it all. President Weah is not your conventional, traditional politician. His election therefore shows that democracy is truly a powerful institution. It makes leaders out of persons and presidents. His leadership has ignited hope, not just for Liberian youth, but also for people across the world. It shows that they too can amount to anything with determination and hard work. The president laments his inability to be here today to personally convey his perspectives on the topic. He would have relished the opportunity had there not been other pressing issues of state which has prevented him from leaving Liberia at this time. He has therefore asked me to make a submission at this symposium, not an ad verbatim speech, but a submission which will capture his own perspectives on the imperatives for making democracy work for the people, the Liberian experience. Ladies and gentlemen, democracy can only work for the people if we create and strengthen institutions of the state apparatus to ensure good governance. Professor Otome, the president has also asked me to use this opportunity to convey to you his best wishes on the occasion of your 63rd birth anniversary. Happy birthday, Prof. He has also asked me to thank you for your great contributions to the discourse for a better Africa and a better world. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, panelists, the story has been told over and again about the peculiar nature of we as SNSA to the Liberian presidency. Not only does it mark the first time in more than 70 years in my country that we have been able to witness a democratic transfer of power. 70 years. It also marked a movement for generational change. Mostly young people, and I can say that I'm one of the oldest in the cabinet. Mostly young people, particularly those who were previously regarded as underprivileged, are now at the helm of the leadership of our country. This has occasioned a renewed sense of vibrancy and a determination to effect change. It is sad that the message that we most time inadvertently communicate to young people by our society is that they are not really needed or ready to effect change. We dole out negligible portions of our national state resources to institutions and programs that should cater to their welfare and pay lip service also to their welfare. This situation usually results into disillusionment with the system, a situation which can be tapped onto and exploited by unsavory politicians. Corruption, inequality, and other social vices make people across the world to give up on institutions and government that are supposedly democratic. In fact, rising inequality has become the trend across Africa and the world today. This has left the least educated and the weakest of our society, the youth, very, very vulnerable and distrustful of the system. As a result of this demographic imbalance, the young people consistently clamor for change, and sometimes, unfortunately, utilize violence as a means to seek change. Unless we build and consolidate institutions of the state, like former US President Barack Obama said, instead of seeking strong men, I can guarantee you that we will not have a peaceful and prosperous African society. With the dawn of a new dispensation of democracy in my country, we are beginning to see a paradigm shift. Laws which are regarded as anti-democratic are being reformed, or in some instances, completely scrapped off the books. Amongst the first legislation that President Weah submitted to the Liberian legislature when he took office was a bill to decriminalize speech offenses. This was preceded by the signing of the historic Table Mountain Declaration by our former president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, which Liberia committed to upholding freedom of speech. The president's desire was to strengthen one of the fundamental institutions that is integral to the very foundation of our democracy, the press. That law, which had been on the books for several generations, had allowed for the arbitrary jailing of journalists for what authorities at the time referred to as criminal libel and criminal malevolence against the president. In other words, this law gave authorities the free hand to trump up charges against reporters once they decided they didn't like a news story. Our new law, which is now being debated at the legislature, sends a notice to all that no journalist should be jailed just for being a journalist. Like one famous writer said, journalism and democracy are two names for the same thing. In fact, a free and unfettered press is an indispensable requirement for democracy. This is why we must ensure that the press itself is not used as instruments for the furtherance of selfish and parochial political interests at the expense of the greater good of the society as a whole. For more than a decade now, the culture of free speech and free expression has flourished in Liberia. The lack of democratic outlets is usually the cause for breakdown of law and order, and in worst cases, the cause for war and destruction. And Liberia has had its fair share of war. There are various explanations for the outbreak of the civil war in Liberia that killed more than 200,000 of my compatriots. Some historians believe that the abuse of power, a corrupt political system, and huge economic disparities are amongst the paramount reasons. Often described as the oldest independent country on the continent, Liberia was founded by free slaves. The so-called Americo-Liberians constituted less than 2% of the country's population. But in the 19th century and in the early 20th century, they made up 100% of eligible voters, disenfranchising everybody else. For over 100 years since its formation, up to 1980, the Americo-Liberian hegemony dominated Liberian politics. This was essentially a one-party state. The hegemony was overthrown in a violent coup that was greeted as liberation from minority domination until the new governors soon proved themselves no better than their predecessors. They too began to clamp down on the opposition and on the freedom of speech and of the press. The result was a full-blown civil war with negative repercussions for the entire West African sub-region. For more than 2 decades, our country witnessed one of the most horrific forms of violence the world had ever seen, a conflict from which Liberia is still reeling today. But a lot has changed. Liberia's institutions and human capacity that were devastated by the war are now being revived. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we are reminded by the fact that the origins of the Liberian conflict can be traced back to various forms of exclusion and marginalization. This is why the current process of nation building is proceeding meticulously so as not to repeat the mistakes of the past. The surest way to achieve democracy and development is to ensure that we build strong institutions which meet the needs of the people and that we administer the affairs of state equitably and fairly. We have now embarked on a process of rebuilding and strengthening those institutions in Liberia which were left in ruins by the war. For more than a decade now, we have introduced a variety of systems to guard against corruption and ensure transparency. Anti-graft institutions, such as the Liberia Anti-Corruption Commission, the General Auditing Commission, have ensured that there are a slew of measures and standards by which public officials are governed and by which the resources of the state is protected. Such measures include declaration of assets by all public officials, new public financial management laws, new procurement laws, all aimed at enhancing transparency and ensuring that the national wealth is fully utilized to the benefit of the people. Our judiciary and legislature are also being strengthened and made to act independently, a move away from the inherent all-powerful presidency. The powers of these two institutions were tested during our recent elections. The courts, in particular, were inundated by electoral cases. Aggrieved Canadians this time ran to the judiciary for redress and not to the streets, nor did they use the barrel of the gun to settle differences. One political pundit put it perfectly when he said that the December 2017 landmark Supreme Court of Liberia ruling, which resolved the acrimonious disputes over the results of the first round of elections amongst various political parties, was the pinnacle of the rule of law reset for Liberia. For several weeks, we waited on tender hooks, with many fearing that we were on the brink again of another round of violence. The country hailed the decision and the fact that the aggrieved parties sought remedies through due process of law. This was a victory for the rule of law and a manifestation of renewed faith in our judicial system. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our government recently launched the Pro-Po agenda for prosperity and development, recognizing that without development, democracy will come under strain. This strategy seeks to have an inclusive and equitable distribution of the national wealth. It lays out our priorities, including the revamping of the country's derelict infrastructure, resuscitating the economy, and also maintaining the peace. Very paramount also is ensuring that we have full transparency and accountability. This is important because without an inclusive and accountable public sector, there cannot be shared prosperity and development under our new democratic dispensation. In order to avoid the mistakes of the past, citizens must be empowered to take full control of their lives. This can only be achieved through the creation of democratic institutions that allow the practice of fundamental rights under the law, but also a system that creates an economic environment which caters to the basic needs of everyone. Policies that aid poverty reduction must be engendered, as extreme poverty anywhere is a threat to democracy everywhere. As a result of the continuous ebbing away at some of the challenges which confronted Liberia, the World Democracy Rating in 2018 gave us some high marks. The index shows that the quality of our democracy improved last year under the new government of President Weah. It places Liberia at 14th place out of 36 countries in the Sub-Saharan region. But there is still a lot more to be done, to which we are committed. Our president also recently signed into law a new legislation which seeks to actualize the national policy of decentralization of local governance. This act of decentralization establishes strong democratic and administrative structures at the local level. Very important to ensure that the people at the local level, the vast majority of our people, also have a say in determining who will lead them at the local level, in their towns, in their villages, in their counties. If democracy is not structured in a way that prohibits the government from excluding people from direct ownership over the way they are governed, it allows the governors to accumulate too many powers. It wouldn't be long if we continue on this path that democracy will become a thing of the past. The progenitors of modern democracy were right when they described it as a rule by the people. Our country, Liberia, has experienced the various forms of governance, from an oligarchic hegemony to a brutal military dictatorship, from governments of warring factions to ones freely chosen by the people. Our collective experiences as a people have led us to the firm conviction that in spite of its own weaknesses and flaws, democracy still remains the best form of governance. Therefore, instead of shunning democracy because it still has not yet delivered our people from the yoke of poverty, ignorance, and disease, we must improve it by strengthening not just the institutions of government, but also the watchdogs and mirrors of the society, the media, and civil society, because they too play a critical role in the democratic process. Actually, they are the real pillars of democracy. Without a strong civil society and a strong mass media, democracy cannot prosper, and therefore the people cannot benefit from democracy. Yet, with all of its imperfections, democracy works for the people if the imperatives of good governance are inculcated into the national fabric. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you again, the representative of His Excellency, the President of Liberia, Mr. George Weah, in the person of the Minister of Information, Cultural Affairs, and Tourism, Honorable Eugene Nagbe. One more time, a round of applause for him. And just a few things I did take away from, I would say, the Liberian example. It's very interesting to hear that the President has signed a bill for the decentralization of local government. We've continuously, for the past 4 or 5 years, had heightened and heated conversations about decentralizing power in Nigeria, giving more power back to the local government, and in some cases, people are saying in regional aspects. But this is another African country with a history that closely, very, very closely mirrors our own, that is taking the steps. So there are many things that we can learn from what is happening in Liberia. And while we still regard ourselves as the giants of Africa and the big brother of Africa, we need to look at what some of our younger siblings and some of the other countries around us are doing that is helping to ground democracy in their countries. Now, he also talked about the fact that democracy is imperfect. It is. We all know it is. Sometimes democracy becomes a situation of the choices of the majority, which sometimes may not be the wisest of choices. But in its imperfections, democracy is still the best for the people. And I think later on, we'll take a poll, we'll take a temperature and see how the room feels about whether or not democracy has truly brought a better life to Nigerians and to people in Africa. But I do want us to remember that while media works, the CSOs work, the governments work, democracy does not work if citizens are not active and involved. And I think it's also very important for us to remember that elections are the lowest hanging fruit. Our role as citizens do not end when we go to the polls and vote. That's actually when the hard work begins. The issues of accountability and transparency and making sure that those who have come out for our votes and have gotten our votes continue to uphold the promises that they've made, and we continue to be involved. So it's not just about elections. The hard work is after we vote. So ladies and gentlemen, as we continue on with the 16th CVL Annual Lecture and International Leadership Symposium, it's my pleasure to give you a quick background of our next speaker. Bishop Matthew Hassan Kuka was born August 31st, 1952 in Kaduna State. He was ordained a Catholic priest on December 19th, 1976. He also attended the University of Ibadan, where he obtained a diploma in religious studies, further receiving a Bachelor of Divinity at the Pontifical University in Rome in 1976, followed by a master's degree in peace studies at the University of Bradford in the United Kingdom. His academic pursuits culminated with a PhD from the University of London's School of Oriental and African Studies in 1990. He is the current bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Sokoto, and between 1999 and 2001, he served as a member of the Nigerian Investigation Commission of the Human Rights Violation. In addition to his work as a parish priest of St. Andrew's Parish in Kaduna from 2004 until his nomination as a bishop, he was the secretary of the National Political Reform Conference 2005, and from 2005 onwards, he has been serving as the chairman of the Ogoni Shell Reconciliation. Please, ladies and gentlemen, I think this is another gentleman here giving his time and, of course, his thoughts on the conversation of today. He deserves a round of applause. As well, if we can, a standing ovation, Bishop Matthew Hassan Kuka.
Thank you very much. Please, thank you. I like the bit about leaders without, what is the word again? So that means the opposite is titled without leadership, whatever. But anyway, Chairman General Gawon, you know, if I were to get a 100 naira for every time I've had to encounter General Gawon, I would by now be a millionaire. But as always, it's really a great pleasure. And I'm really, truly very happy to hear General Gawon come slightly closer. He's not there yet to some of the things his wife and I tried to conspire, namely to persuade him to write a biography. I remember when I was talking about it, the wife was behind, she was nodding. But thank you very much. Again, you know, it suggests very clearly the benefits of experience and age. Sometimes when you listen to these people for just 5 minutes, it's better than reading 10 books of political theory. General, sir, Dr. Padutomi, well, let me, as we say, stand on existing protocol. I'm standing on existing protocol, and as you can see, I'm still not taller than, despite the support of protocols. I think the first lecture I remember I delivered had to do with Patutomi. What birthday? Is it 40? No, I don't think so. 40th. So you see, I've always tried to respond to him because if I don't, it will amount to child abuse. You know, he's a much younger person. So I try my best to hold the hand of my younger brother. But he's, I don't want to, but I think I might say it. You know, he's an incredible human being, really incredible. I feeling a bit sleepy because at 1 p.m. yesterday I was in Vienna rounding up a meeting. We finished at 1:30, and then I left for the airport at 2, got to London. So I just arrived this morning. I managed to catch a 7:30 flight. I have to actually go back to Abuja because President Salif Johnson is in Abuja to see the Peace Committee at about 6 p.m. So I was actually hoping that President George Weah would be here. So at least let me make an open declaration. I'm not a supporter of Barcelona, the team he played for. The football team I support in the Spanish league is actually Atletico Madrid. But I want to thank you because the letter that was written to me actually read like a paper. And let me just take a few lines. It says, "We are particularly motivated in inviting you following the statement made in Accra, Ghana by President Barack Obama on his first visit to Africa as president, that what Africa needs is strong institutions and not strong men." First of all, I was too angry to listen to what Obama said. For the simple reason that he didn't come to Nigeria. But I could understand why he went to Ghana to make the speech. And if you look at the history, Ghana has done, as far as the American connection is concerned, Ghana has done pretty well. The Americans showed a lot of interest in Ghana. In 1957, at their independence, unknown to many of us. Among other people, Martin Luther King was there in Accra and spoke quite eloquently. And one of the things he said, in God is our trust. Sorry, no, this is not. I'll come to it, but he was there, and he was struck by the idea of the freedom of the independence of Ghana and its implications for Africa. Another significant development is the contribution of the first black man to be in the Supreme Court of the United States of America, the great Thurgood Marshall, who, for those of you who might know, actually helped to draft the Constitution of Ghana. You remember also the special Shirley Temple was ambassador to Ghana. So I think I make the point that I can understand contextually why Obama will go to Ghana to make the speech that he had to make. However, I had some, then as now, some very serious theoretical disagreement with Obama's statement. Well, first of all, it was the long speech. I don't think many of us have read the speech. The speech was really not about institutions and strong men. But that's the only line that we've held on to tenaciously. But if you read it in a wider context, it addresses a range of, it's rather a pretty long speech. But I think that the context of institutions and strong men doesn't say anything about strong women, unfortunately. It is assumed. You know, when President Thatcher was Prime Minister, he said she went to visit a constituency. She went to address women. And the women were carrying, to welcome her, they carried a placard, Mrs. Thatcher, our man. So I'm sure you understand why we're focusing only on strong men. But I think, first of all, we must understand that we are not left with a binary choice of either or. You either have strong men or strong institutions. My argument, preliminary argument, and I'd like to say three things. The first is this interrogation. The second is the whole question of whether democracy works. And the third is what really we need to do. And I think most of what needs to be said has actually been said most eloquently by the future president of Liberia. You got this job because you seem to look like George Weah himself. So please learn well. But America itself, this is the great contradiction in American history. So when Obama makes this statement, he forgets that America itself was a state founded on violence. Right? America, the white settlers had to kill the Indians and take over their land. And America has consistently been at war. Now, America was built on the shoulder of strong men, who also went on to build strong institutions. And the defense of those institutions remains then as now the ideological rationale for America's interventions around the world. But also, we must not forget that it was America that institutionalized slavery. They also, by extension, institutionalized white supremacy. They institutionalized the culture of the strong man. And really, when you listen, you see some of the soft things that happen in America. It will be Jimmy Carter, it will be Obama himself. And you see the way that America reacted to Obamacare. So I make the point that America is probably not the best advertisement for the distinction between strong men and institutions, because the idea of strong men still persists. And in Hollywood, the image of John Wayne, of Reagan himself, the quintessential cowboy, and up till today, Rambo. So just very clearly that in America, there's really no place for weak people. So America, of course, has been an exporter of violence. Let me put it that way, to consolidate what they believe are their fundamental beliefs. And as you can hear, they are leading the charge in Venezuela. Therefore, and it's important, the American national anthem, the last 4 lines said, "Then conquer we must when our cause is just, and this be our motto, in God is our trust. And the star-spangled banner in triumph we shall wave over the land of the free and home of the brave." So America has always been, then as now, a country of strong men. What does that say? It therefore does not negate the fact that strong men can use their strength to build strong institutions. So I think that what our tragedy should not be to lament over the choice between strong men and strong institutions. It is that we had a lot of strong men. What did they use their energy for? Well, I think that really, for me, is the issue. Because as America itself realized, building the institutions is not enough. You have to have the energy, in metaphorical terms, one way or the other, to defend these institutions. So in my view, our challenge is not so much a choice between strong men and strong institutions. It is indeed, but the choice, it is that both choices are not necessarily, in the final analysis, mutually exclusive. Because guess what? Indeed, Obama himself is a beneficiary of something that is akin to the fight between David and Goliath. In the sense that America has presented the world with a certain level of certainty. And that whether it's Trumpism or whatever, America will override those things. And I think really, the real challenge and the real test in institutions is not necessarily how effective they are, but whether they can rise up to a challenge when the challenges come. Now, the notion of audacity, which underpins, and I think is a very, very fundamental statement. You know, when Obama spoke about, the title of his book, but the one I'm most impressed by is the book written by his director of campaign, David Plouffe, titled The Audacity to Win. Because it also suggests very clearly that when a country has built institutions, whether it has strong men or strong women or not, the resilience of those institutions, as our brother from Senegal, from Liberia said very well, that, and in the final analysis, this is the beauty of democracy. Because the beauty of democracy is actually in the intangibles. They're not the things you can feel. But the notion that a poor man, a poor boy, the son of poor parents, can come from the backwaters of Liberia to the presidency, that possibility alone is what is very important. And as long as a country maintains that possibility, now, we don't know whether Nigeria will win the World Cup. But the very fact that there is a feeling that if you work very hard, the opportunity is there. That is what sustains democracy. Now, but what is even more interesting is a book I read about the middle of last year. And I think this is where the debate about strong institutions and strong men terminates, which is that there is a new kid on the block. Namely, Moses Nehm published a book, and I'm sure many of you here must have read it. It says, The End of Power. It talks about ballrooms and churches, but the subtitle, Why Being in Charge Isn't What It Used to Be. That is that power as we understand it is no longer, it's literally dead and gone. Because Moyes argues that power is actually in decay. All right? It's slipping away because it is so slippery and so elusive. But power is also mutating. And it's no longer about brawn, not about strength. It's about brain. So to some extent, again, the David and Goliath becomes very important, which is, I don't know whether you've read that story very well. Story of David and Goliath. It was a fight that was, more or less like the kind of thing people used to do before. Instead of a whole community going to war, 2 people can fight. Whoever wrestles the other down, the community can go home and with less casualties. But David decided that he was going to challenge Goliath. And if you remember in the account, Saul said, look, small boy, if you are going to fight, you must look like a soldier. Here my armor. Look like a soldier. You can't be going to fight this man just like that. David actually tried the armor. It didn't fit. He said, here. He looked at Goliath and says, and this is where I like the saying. Some people said, people saw Goliath and they were frightened. David saw Goliath and said, this guy is too big for me to miss. But then he chose his game, chose his weapon, and I'm not a businessman, as you can see. The one that is going to be talking about money next year, they have excluded me. This is this one that we are just talking grammar now. This is the one they have invited me. But the one that can give me a bit of economic opportunity, I've been excluded. But David decides that I'm going to fight this battle on my own terms. And if you look at, for me, if you read David Plouffe, I'm not sure Obama really believed that he could win the presidency. But you see, when man meets moment, things come together. And again, when you look at the Bible, the story of Moses, when Moses, at the time Moses killed the Israelites, he really showed the qualities of a leader. He could sacrifice his life. Even when he was alone, he showed the quality of a leader. But Moses was ready, but God was not ready. When God was ready, Moses started giving excuses. So really, essentially, this is what I say to people who contest elections and they lose, and they contest elections and they lose. Sometimes we are ready and God is not ready. The point I'm making, therefore, is that when you look at Obama, and it speaks to the issue of the death of power. He didn't have the money. He didn't have the big names. But he took on the entire American establishment and actually won. The circumstances are distinct. But it also means that in these matters, sometimes it is important that we choose the weapon. Like Julius Nyerere used to say, you can't use the weapons of the strong to fight the strong. Point I'm making is, we are now at a wall of ideas. And it is actually cheaper. You notice, as we have the case now with, can you compare Shekau with anybody in Nigeria? How do you explain a man who seems, they did an interview, they went to his village, interviewed his mother, interviewed people there. But look at the man himself. How do you explain the fact that a man will not go to school, holding an entire nation and its army, and fighting on his own terms? It said that, and I think, Professor Moyes made the point, when he said that Al-Qaeda, the budget that Al-Qaeda had to destroy the Twin Towers, everything they are planning, everything put together, was just about $500,000. Everything. But since then, it has cost America $3.something trillion to rebuild, to reposition itself, to defend itself, to actually track and actually find Osama and deal with other things. Meaning that clearly, the world is changing, and democracy provides us an opportunity to take advantage of the collapse of power in terms of standing armies and their capacities, big bank accounts, and so on and so forth. So really, the point I'm making is that things have changed. Now the President of America can go to address Congress, nothing. Mark Zuckerberg goes to Congress, and the stock market begins to shake. Young boy, just how many years? People are making younger, they are president of 200 million people, 300 million people. Mark Zuckerberg, small boy, didn't ask anybody, but he is president of over 2 billion people on the internet. So we have to rethink. So, yes, he's president of 2 billion people because all of us, including myself standing here, all of us. So I make the point because it takes me to the second point. But really, the point I'm making is that strong institutions, strong men, all those are important, but they've become redundant. And that in the final analysis, it is here. It is the brains. And you can see one of the very interesting things is to look at all these little children. All these mothers and fathers, they go and buy these expensive phones. But it's only the 5-year-old, 6-year-old children who know what to do with the phone. No, so? So the world is changing. And that, therefore, the question then is, why democracy? And again, in your letter, you said, you further stated, several years down the line, the hopes of reformed and democratic Africa seem to be waning, as electoral processes in Africa are marred with diverse problems. This is your letter to me. While there has been appreciable progress in moving away from armed conflict in some African countries, many African governments remain largely inefficient, less than transparent, and characterized by weak institutions. A lot of people still remain in poverty, among other basic socio-political and economic ills, with incumbents increasingly becoming adept at winning at the polls through manipulation. The question being asked by many people is, what are the prospects of real democracy in Africa? That's your letter. People, not only are people determined to win at all costs. You know, it was said of an African dictator that when the presidential elections ended, so the chairman of their local INEC rushed to the president and said, President, I'm really happy, sir. You've won 99% of the votes. President was still sitting on his desk writing. He said, sir, you won by 99%. President looked up. Said, go and find the bastard 1% that didn't vote and let me know why they didn't vote for me. So, you know, that now people in the opposition, they don't even, the idea that it's a fair competition is literally out of the question. So it's graphic. But let's not forget, we are making progress. And one of the problems with us is that I don't think we actually sufficiently appreciate how much progress we are making. Even the very fact that things that we took for granted yesterday, we no longer take them for granted. Now, I think the lady, the compare, made a very interesting point. And you said about elections, because tomorrow I'll be speaking in Abuja about elections and violence. But in 1977, not too long ago, there were 89 countries which were under autocratic rule. 89 countries in Africa and parts of the world. But by 2011, the number had come down to only 22. Today, I think we are proud to say that in Africa, everybody has woken up to the fact that whether you agree with, whether you know how to spell democracy or not, you must pretend to be democratic. So everybody, for me, that is progress. You know, Kamuzu Banda, before in the 80s, when they told him that the opposition is coming back, that they are coming back, people from his country who have been in exile are coming back home. He said, let them come. Let them come. I'll give them a fair trial and hang all of them. Now, I'll give them a fair hearing, and I will still hang all of them. Now, imagine that things have changed so much that everybody is now at least pretending to be a Democrat. And they are going through the routine of election. Softly, softly, we go catch monkey. So I think we must not become so despondent as to say, are our elections free? Are they really fair? No. Somebody went to monitor elections in Ghana. I've forgotten which elections those were. And one of the international observers, they were asking people, BBC did a program. But the only thing I remember was one of them. They asked him how, the elections were fair. And we always watch for process. Are people standing on the line? Yes. Did anybody fight? No. And so, I delivered materials in good time. Yes. We finished our voting by 2 p.m. Wonderful. So what? Now, so when they asked this guy, he said, yes, the elections were free, they were fair. So they asked one particular observer. He said, the elections were free, they were fair, but they were not free from fear. So, but the question, so the point I'm making therefore is that we can see that everybody is heading in that direction. And like I always say, let's be patient. In many cases, biology will help us. Many of these people, spoilers, They are in their 80s, soon be in their 80s. So you are not. You see, I don't know why you are laughing, because I didn't say anything. Now, but you see, ask yourself, no, seriously now, ask yourself, which of these retired people who have finished government, how many of them have you seen invited to go and give a talk anywhere in Nigeria? No, seriously. Seriously. I looked at the names, sir, of the 71 generals yesterday, which was in the papers. The 71 generals in solidarity. And I didn't see your name. But no, the point I'm making is that we will do our best. Now, you see, in Algeria, for example, look, you know, sometimes if you lose your finger and you are crying, and you turn around the corner and see somebody who has lost 3 fingers, he won't give you back your 1 finger, but he say, oh God, I thank God I'm not like this man. Do you know, in Algeria today, Bouteflika became president in 1999. Even though that was democratic in terms of the democratic elections. But remember that in 1993, which was the year that Babangida stepped aside, Abi, that was the year that FIS, the Islamic group, nearly won the elections and the military stepped in. And then Bouteflika finally held the fort for a while, and finally became democratically elected in 1999. Since then, we have had Babangida, we've had Shonekon, we've had Abdul Salam, we've had Abacha, we've had you people are disrupting me. Okay, allow me to finish. We've had Abacha, we've had Abacha, we've had Abdul Salam, we've had Obasanjo, Maktu, we've had Yaradua, we've had Jonathan, we have Buhari, Maktu. Now, and despite all this, I don't know whether we are happier than the people of Algeria, but up till today, Bouteflika is still the presidential candidate after 20 years. And guess what? The last election, people campaigned without seeing him because he has been on a wheelchair for God knows how many. And even this one, the people have said he's going to run, although they can't find him, but he's going to run. So I'm just saying that gradually, because there is something about the waves of democracy. And like you very rightly said, there is something to be said in favor of age and mentoring. It's just that, you know, the worry I have with many Nigerians, everybody thinks that political participation is standing for elections. And one of the things that I thought President Weah did very well was, because the critical question is, what do you do after you lose? Very often, many of us spend too much time lamenting. But the young man, let me call him that because I'm far older than him, went, retooled himself, did some reflection, improved on himself, and came back better prepared. So the challenge for young people is, yes, it will take time. But meanwhile, use the opportunity to learn about your country. Now, there is a lot of cynicism. But the critical question about whether democracy is working for us is, who brought the democracy? Again, the lady made the point. I think and the point, that the way I put it in my paper is, was democracy born naturally or by artificial insemination? Because it doesn't change, it doesn't make the baby less beautiful, but it also means certain things. Because the question we ask is, people think, oh, the West brought democracy to us and so on and so forth. But the truth of the matter is that democracy is an instinct. It may have been framed in a different way. But each and every one of us at birth understands what democracy is. Not in terms of the textbook, but in terms of the reflexes, the nuances. Therefore, in our own case, when we go back to Africa, we ask ourselves, you know, people think that transition is a science of its own in political science. Transitions we think that transition from dictatorship is logically transition to democracy. Wrong. It doesn't work that way. Because as you can see, we have had transitions. For all these years now, we thought that the soldiers have tried their best, and we really thank them. But as you can see, the soldiers are still prepared to reproduce themselves, and they're not about going anywhere. That suggests very clearly that we must be modest in measuring how much progress we expect to make. And like I said, President Buhari, General Obasanjo, they're not bad people. They're good people. But the problem is the military reflex doesn't allow you, and it's not because people are good, but no. It's that if I became president of Nigeria today, I probably see the table as an altar. I probably think everybody should be. And like I said to people who say to me, look, why don't you contest for office? I said, look, if you make me governor today, the first meeting of the State Executive Council, we begin with prayer. And then after prayer, I begin to tell you how, in the name of God, we are going to stand for judgment. Therefore, let us please be sure that we serve the people, we make the sacrifices. Nobody is going to buy a new car until every person in this state is smiling. Then after they tell me, Father, this is not church, it is politics. It's not church, politics. So many of us, when we are spectators, everything looks easy. But the point I'm making is, if you look across Africa, let us be modest in our expectations. Because we have really not covered the kind of ground we need to cover. Because what you see is that in those countries where Africans fought for independence or fought for democracy, you see the result, as in Zimbabwe, as in South Africa. Compare Uganda, compare Rwanda, DRC, Eritrea, Algeria, and then Nigeria. You will see that as in Uganda, as in Rwanda, as in DRC, as in Zimbabwe, those who led the struggle believe that they've appropriated all the tools of power. And that is why Mugabe believed that he was going to stay until he dropped. That is why Museveni does not believe, yes, they can go through the formalities of election, but they don't expect to lose an election. And Rwanda, again, people forget. Everybody speaks about Rwanda with punctuation mark. It's wonderful, beautiful country, peaceful country. Democracy was not meant to be about infrastructure. This is the big mistake Nigerians make. And I hear these governors who say they call people, they take pages on newspapers, they show road, although you cannot tell the distance of a road by looking at the photograph. But they tell you, oh, this is the number of roads we have constructed. And my friend Pat Otobi said something. He's more cynical than I am. He said, I don't know whether I remember. He said, if you see two Nigerians talking, one man said, oh boy, our governor has done 50 kilometers of road in the last 4 years. His friend will say, 50 kilometers, where we see 10 kilometers. So, the comparison, but people are showing all the work they are doing, all the structure. And I said, these guys don't understand what democracy is. Because if democracy were just about highways and buildings and so on, and guess what? If you happen to come from villages, as you are driving in Nigeria, you notice that all the beautiful primary schools are by the roadside. Even when they decide to repaint them, so when you are driving past, you say, hi, now, wow, this state, come and see how governor they work. Until you enter inside and discover the schools inside have nothing. But the point I'm making is I'm not against infrastructure. We have none, and we commend those who are giving us infrastructure. But for me, the most important infrastructure is the infrastructure of the brain. Because if it were just about elections, then please don't forget. In fact, when I went to the United Nations office in Geneva, somebody took me around and he told me that when they were putting up the building, I don't know whether it's anecdotal. He said, but he was a white man, a white German. He said, look, that when they were building this place, Hitler came late, and to punish him, because it was contribution from different nations, he said he decided to punish the Germans by asking Hitler to go and build the toilets. And the man said to me, I didn't go to the toilets, but he said to me, we have changed almost everything in these buildings except the toilets. That's the quality of work that. So the quality of infrastructure that Hitler left behind in Germany is impossible to surpass. And those of you who prefer to go south for your holidays and go to South Africa, all the roads, most of the roads you see, the ones that are still standing gidigba, they are the ones who were constructed under apartheid. So there is no correlation between democracy and physical infrastructure. The beauty of democracy is that it allows the mind. It opens up frontiers for imagination, and that I can dream. And this is the beautiful thing about America. Obama suggests and shows us very clearly that you can dream. Of course, nobody expects that there will be another black president very soon. But the very fact that it happened at all. So the beauty of democracy is the possibilities that lies ahead. Now, the next point I want to make, and by way of conclusion, is to look at the whole question of, has democracy delivered for us in Africa? Please, let us not forget. If you didn't, I bought the last edition of Time magazine for last year, and the last edition of The Economist of London. Let me tell you, read out something for you. Edward Felsenthal, he's the editor of Time magazine. He said, and I quote, "Today, democracy around the world faces its biggest crisis in decades. Its foundations undermined by invective from on high and toxins from below, by new technologies that power ancient impulses, by a poisonous cocktail of strong men and weakening institutions." End of quote. There is a column in the Economist of London called Budget, and the writer said, "The British system is full of maladies and is governed by a self-involved clique that rewards group membership above competence and self-confidence above expertise." It's the economy. The last edition of The Economist, the last edition of Time magazine. These are supposed to be the bastions of democracy for us. Does it make you feel happy because you lost a finger, somebody else is losing? So it is that really, I'm not saying we shouldn't be very hopeful, but to understand that democracy was not supposed to make us so comfortable and happy. It more or less is akin to marriage. Right? Like I said to men, all these men, when they are writing to their girlfriend, they say, "I will swim the highest, the deepest ocean. I'll climb the highest mountain." After marriage has taken place, go to market is a problem. So it's not, but does that mean marriage is not beautiful? No, it isn't. It's just that the problems will be there. The capacity to manage the problems is what keeps us together. It's what keeps me in the priesthood, is what keeps you married, and so on. So for me, the greatest challenge for us is how do we manage sometimes what political scientists in the 60s talked about, rising expectations. Sometimes we expect life to change. And like again, the lady said, it is not something that is going to happen deus ex machina. We have to work on it. Before democracy, of course, let's not forget, we had autocracy, we had aristocracy, we had oligarchy, we had plutocracy. We had all kinds of systems of government. And of course, we had divine right of kings. And today, as you can see, in this country, it's troubling how the spiral of feudalism is rising and rising and rising pari passu with the claims of democracy. And all the principles of democracy, because it's just a measure of whether we are really democratic or whether we are feudal. And the truth of the matter is that, like Churchill said, yes, there are other forms of government. But please, let's not forget why democracy became so important. The First World War, over 10 million people lost their lives. The Second World War, over 100 million people lost their lives. Then, the leaders of the world realized a few Africans died white water, but this is white people killing white people. They saw a certain part of the human persona that was totally unacceptable. And if you go back and read the principles of the United Nations Human Rights Declaration, which really is the frame to hold the claims of democracy. Essentially, it is freedom. Again, this is what, it draws very, very substantially from Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg speech, which, as you know, is a very short speech, which Abraham Lincoln delivered on the 19th of November, 1863. Now, it formed the backdrop for Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Because in that speech, only 300 words, Abraham Lincoln said, and I quote just a little bit of it, 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth in this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. It is only democracy that makes that possibility, that all of us are created equal. Doesn't matter your status. Contrast that with feudalism and all the systems that the world fought to create a better society. Because if you subscribe to theocracy, it means that you were appointed by God and nobody can ask a question. If you want to live under plutocracy, it means only the people in Victoria Island and Ikoyi and the extension, they are the ones who will rule. That's why Fela used to talk about, and I noticed his son and his daughter. I've heard them say, Ikoyi people. When they talk of it, that is the yardstick for measuring, the distance. But it is that there are other forms of government. And that's why Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government except for others. Because others have been tested, but none has survived and has been as resilient as democracy. So Abraham Lincoln said, now, we are engaged in a civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure, that we hear that these dead shall not have died in vain, and that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. So, the challenge of handing the baton of democracy to the next generation, we're not talking here about electing office. We're not talking here about presidents. We're not talking about, no, not only one person can be president. But we're talking about, and this for me is the danger. If you want to hire a driver, okay, Oga, we were, when I was a young priest in Kaduna, we were in the cathedral, so we fired a security man. So we wanted to hire another one. 3 of them showed up. So I was on the interview panel, we were asking. The 2 did very, then this man finally came. He looked a little bit tipsy. So we asked him, have you done this work before? He said, yes, sir. How many years? He said, 2 years. Where and where? He said, 2 places. So why did they drive you? He said, the other man, they worry me. I said, okay, what of this other man? He said, God, the man, they 2 wake me up. This is a security man. He's complaining that he left his job because he's supposed to be awake while Oga is sleeping. So we say, no, this is not a candidate. But I'm saying, and listen very carefully, if you want to hire a driver, you ask questions. If you want to hire a teacher, you ask questions. Somebody comes wearing beautiful uniforms and says he's a pilot, you have to ask him to show it's not the uniform. The only thing that you don't need any qualification for is politics. No qualification. Nobody will ask you, where did you practice? And this is why, for me, there is a difference between good people doing bad things and bad people just deliberately doing bad things. And what we have in Nigeria, and I'm lucky that I have met quite a good number of the people in high office. Extraordinarily good people, decent people. I can tell you, cross my heart, I know that. But too many bad things are happening under their care. Why? Because you don't get a sense that people have studied, they have reflected, they have thought about what they want to do with them. And this is why you find that many of these people who spend a long time in prison always have a way of coming back a little bit better refined. And it's one of the ways of understanding Mandela. I'm not saying everybody should go to prison, but I'm saying, now, there is, in Vienna yesterday, somebody asked me a question. He said, he's an Indian. He said, I'm coming to Nigeria. Do you know a place where they have a place for silence? Eh? Silence in Nigeria. But I'm a Catholic priest, so I have to answer correctly. I know that we make noise, but there are parts of the Catholic Church has monasteries. So I told him we have monasteries. So when he comes, he says he wants to go and spend 5 days. One of the best scientists in the world, I've forgotten his name again. He said, Jewish, I don't remember his name. Somebody, Harry. But he says every year, he goes away for 1 full month with nothing, no member of his family, and just stays for 1 full month, saying nothing, doing nothing, thinking of nothing. In England, one of my friends came and invited me that there are one monastery. You can go there for 2 days of silence, 3 days of silence. So my friend said, why don't we go for 3 days? I said, okay, let's start with 2 hours for me. I don't, But, what happens, and I'm sorry, I'm going to end very soon. What happens is that, and if you see a Nigerian, I don't know how it is in your place, but if you see a Nigerian president or governor or public official, I feel sorry for these people. Because as you are waiting, the man is stepping out in the morning. There are already people in dark glasses, suits, and so on waiting. These guys will follow you everywhere you go until you say good night and you are closing your door. The next morning, they arrive. There is funeral, there is wedding, this. So you ask, where will somebody find time to reflect about the problems of our country? So I make the point because, and this is where I want to end, is that the famous August 28, 1983, 63 speech of Martin Luther King. I don't know whether some of you, please, it's a speech that even now when I read it, my eyes almost go wet. I spent most of last month just reading a collection of Martin Luther King's speeches. It's incredible to think about a man of such intelligence at that very tender age. But one of the things all through his life, all through his speeches, he is appealing to the conscience of America, living under this terribly oppressive system. But he never resorted to violence. Now, when you go back to the speech, I just took part of it. It says, 100 years later, because Abraham Lincoln's speech was in 1863, he is speaking in 1963, 100 years later. And then a lot of the speech draws from the U.S. Declaration. But he also confronts America with the Constitution, confronts America with the Declaration of Independence and the Gettysburg speech. And he says, 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of the vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languishing in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. Now, I'm sure many of you, if you've been to Washington, you know where the Lincoln Memorial is. Martin Luther King, they chose deliberately where to deliver this speech. Sometimes it's not what you say, it's where you say it. Now, if you've been to Washington, I've been to the Washington Memorial, you see the old man sitting there. And Martin Luther King is literally saying, re-echoing, you are our witness. Then he says, and so we have come here today. We have come here today to dramatize our condition. We black people have come here today. This is what America promised us. This is what the Constitution of America promised us. But we black people are still living in little islands of frustration. The Constitution and Declaration of Independence, they were signing, those who signed it, they were signing a promissory note to which every American will fall heir. That is, everybody being an American will inherit all this. Go back and read the Nigerian Constitution, chapter 2. You think you are reading the Catholic Catechism in terms of the promises. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, should be guaranteed the unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro a bad check. Okay? America has given the Negro a bad check. A check which has come back marked insufficient funds. That's what he said. You gave us a check We as black people have taken the check because all the promises these politicians are making is that it's supposed to be a check. But tomorrow go and try cashing any of them. Okay, you promise us this. Oh, you say, you know, not saying a campaign. Did you expect to be taken? This is politics. Martin Luther King says the check has come back marked insufficient funds. But, and this is the part I like. He says, but we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice can be bankrupt. We refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice can be bankrupt. Now, I meet a lot of people who say to me, you know, those who don't like me, and there are many, they say, you know, you've just left your job, you're a politician, following politicians. I say, my dear, if you are a Catholic priest, or if you are really a Christian in position of authority, and you know what this country has, and you can sleep peacefully, then something is wrong. I'm a very privileged Nigerian. Very, very privileged. Very privileged. I don't know when I bought a suit last. People buy clothes for me. They buy shoes for me. So I'm a very privileged Nigerian. If I kept my mouth shut, I'll be, you know, people think that somehow there must be, when you do all this, there must be something to do with money. But really, can you live in a country so enormously endowed, with so much crippling and unacceptable inequalities, and you think that somehow there's nothing we can do? Because we have to refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. So we're talking about paying workers 30,000 naira. Say we cannot pay. Cannot pay. How much does it take to celebrate the birthday of a girlfriend of somebody's wife who is in big office? Really, I mean, these are very serious moral issues. Is there a senior government official, anybody with authority and power, that can send 30,000 naira to his son or daughter on their birthday at the end of a month? So we refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we have come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches and freedom of justice. So I want to end, first of all, by thanking you, but to appeal to you. The journey is long. We are not where we were last year. One of the things I said not long ago, to take a quotation from the book of Jeremiah. And I was saying, on the day of election, when you go to have your bath, stand in front of your mirror, ask yourself. You know what Jeremiah said? Look at yourself and ask yourself, am I more handsome than I was last year? Am I fatter? Am I thinner? How do I look? Then you go back and go back to what Jeremiah said. He said, you are at the crossroads. Look left and look right. The road that stood you in good state, that road, follow. So we must do the best we can to build our country, but please let us never expect. Democracy is full of disappointment, and those you elect today, tomorrow they will disappoint you. But that is not to say that democracy is a disappointment. It is that we must continue, because at the end, it's a work in progress. And like one of our African scholars said, in the rendezvous of victory, there ought to be and there should be room for everybody. Thank you very much.
I do believe that this is a speech that deserves much more of an applause. We have to say a very, very big thank you to Bishop Matthew Hassan Kuka. That was an absolutely in speech. So many takeaways there, but I think also one towards the end about our own responsibility and asking questions. I took so many notes. I was tweeting about what he was saying. I don't even know where to start from. But I know that each and every one of us was able to take away something from what the bishop said. So one more time, please, a round of applause for Bishop Matthew Hassan Kuka. Just a little bit of an amendment to the